well. But I've created a Google form that I've shared in the chat because 60 minutes is not really enough time to go through everyone's issues. So if you still need help after this, please go to that Google form and share some of your details there. If you are able to help, then reach out to me and I'll share some of the details. There's one of the questions in the form is a privacy question. Do you want to share your contact info? Do you want us to contact you? So I want to be respectful of folks' privacy. And if you want to share a challenge on this call or you have something to share, then feel free to unmute. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So we had a bunch of questions come in from the NHS. So it looks like Matt Hobbs, I think you're on the call, and Adam Crimes, you had sent a few questions in about the NHS UK site, Govt.uk, the COVID-19 stats page. So let's get started with that, and then if anybody else has suggestions on other sites to look at, please feel free to jump in when there's a lull or throw something in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I know, Andy, you ran a couple of tests against the NHS sites that we were looking at here.
The tests into web page, the pages into web page tests, and just ran them through. So quick look at what's there, and there are some mobile tests and there are some desktop tests.
Yeah, I saw the where was it? So yeah, this was the emulated Pixel, and then you had the Chrome cable, and they were run from the London, UK web page test instance. The first one I looked at last night was the COVID-19 stat one. And I thought that one was particularly interesting because, let me go and just kind of load that page up. Actually, that's not it. It's the sign up form. So this one here, it loads very quickly, which is great. There's the map here does appear to be broken. It's very lightweight. And it looks like there's a little bit of a error situation here with one of the third parties. So if I click refresh on this, you'll see that there's a bunch of 404 errors for some of the JSON payloads. I did notice that one of the things here, so it looks like it's using Azure CDN, and there's a TCP miss on the errors. So it looks like the CDN is passing through the errors to the origin, which is a default behavior for a lot of CDNs. One thing that they might want to consider doing is have like a negative cache TTL just to protect the origin server from receiving a bunch of requests for these error payloads. This might reduce some origin load just by having that little buffer, even if it's like 10 seconds or 5 seconds. And then I also noticed that the JSON payloads here, they were not being compressed. So if you take a look at the responses here, some of these, they're also fairly small as well, but they could benefit from gzip or droplet compression. Anybody else have any kind of thoughts on some of the things that we could do to optimize the site?
Can you hear me, Paul?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry, my setup's a little weird. I noticed when I pulled one of the JavaScript chunks that even in the latest version of Firefox Nightly, that it's pulling down JavaScript that looks like it's using a lot of transforms.
I'm sorry, your audio is breaking up, Jeremy.
Sorry. It looks like the JavaScript, even in Firefox Nightly, is still being transformed quite a bit. Like it's not using a lot of modern syntax, and that's to increase compatibility, of course, because that's kind of what Babel is there for.
Right.
Maybe an opportunity there to kind of do module, no module, to send smaller bundles to browsers that can understand those features natively, arrow functions.
Okay, so you're suggesting to modularize these and add smaller bundles?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Anybody else?
Well,
Was it-
generating different bundles. There's a write up on it. I can share. It's a little involved, but it can cut down JavaScript bundles by quite a bit.
Yep. Okay, cool.
A little bit. This is currently owned by Public Health England, and they are taking it on board. It doesn't really follow GDS guidelines at the moment. You turn off JavaScript, you need to enable JavaScript on this page. That is not at all good. So we're hoping to be able to bring that in-house a little bit. So that is definitely one thing we'll look at, is actually, however they built it, doing it more on the server side to actually allow JavaScript to fail. So that's something that I've noticed, that it doesn't do very well at all. Progressive enhancement isn't its thing, really.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add to that, Matt, is in the middle of the chunks Jeremy was talking about, there's some base64 encoded images actually embedded in the scripts themselves, and
Okay.
there's no need for those to be in the script. They can be, loaded at a lower priority, so they arrive when they're ready.
This is a Webpack generated bundle.
It is.
Okay, yeah, it looks like it. I would be, I mean, I'm not trying to overstep my bounds, but I'd be happy to look at that configuration. If anybody interested in that.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be really useful. I can try and find out who the team is with, and I'll find out a few details and how exactly this has been built. This has basically sort of come into fruition over the past couple of weeks, and in terms of who owns it and what they're doing with it, we're still trying to catch up a little bit, but that would be really useful if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of been my specialty lately, is messing with tool chain. I'd be happy to look.
Cool. Awesome. Anybody else have anything on this one? Or do we want to move on to the NHS? Oh, it looks like Amin had a comment here. Feel free to unmute yourselves as well and share.
Hello, everyone.
It looks like there's a few big libraries that are pulled in to do what looks like very little. Date formatting, Lodash, things like that. I think there's opportunities to probably reduce that.
Okay, cool.
So looked at some of the slowest responses that are coming back from the page, and there's a big chunk JS bundle that took almost a second to load on my connection in the United States. So you may want to inspect some of the slower responses that you have in your response log.
Cool. So sorry, go ahead.
I also noticed there were a couple of downstream things that weren't cached, like a GeoJSON response and some CSS and JS. Those might be worthwhile investigating too.
Which ones are those? I'm sorry, let me pull it back to here.
So the one that they're not necessarily owned by this website, but there's an open data GeoJSON bundle that gets loaded.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not seeing that on this page.
I can here. I can.
If you want to share your screen, go ahead.
Yeah, let's all do that. Hold on. Let's see. Sorry if y'all hear the baby in the background. She's being a grump. Y'all see my site speed IO rendering?
Yes.
Okay, we can see it.
Yeah, there's this open data GeoJSON element that comes in is 446 kilobytes, and it doesn't have any sort of downstream cache. There's also I don't know if y'all have run this tool before, but it's really nice for helping looking at responses. It's called SiteSpeed.io. I use it all the time, and you can go in and look and see that there are a bunch of different domains that haven't been used. See what it has like a page rendering and timing summary or whatever. So I'll post the Docker command that I ran in the chat so y'all can take a look at this at your leisure.
Cool. There's another thing that I had found when I was looking at web page tests. Let me go and share my screen. It looks like, so this is, there's a lot of red here because of all the 404 errors. But this govuk crest.png, this was actually returning a 200 status code, but it was HTML. When you look at the response, it looks like it was just returning the base page. So that PNG file was defaulting to the base the base HTML instead of displaying a PNG file. So wherever the PNG is being referenced, it's clearly not being rendered anywhere, but it's also adding an additional HTML page to the site, which I believe this is cached, which is good. So it's probably not as impactful to the origin, but you might want to fix that PNG.
Yeah, the crown is one of the things that's base 64 encoded in the Webpack bundle.
Okay, cool.
I think the PNGs are not the only one that have that problem. I ran a crawler on this, and I crawled the source map source links. That's basically any 404 is serving the index page instead of responding 404.
Okay, cool. Matt, I know this is the one that you recommended. Any questions before we move on to another site?
No, not at all. No, this is really, really good. So I can feed this back to the team now and no, definitely move on to another site to give others the opportunity.
Cool. Awesome. Does anybody have, before we, sorry, I've got NHS queued up, but does anybody have any site that they want to look at that's on the call that maybe didn't submit something prior? Okay. So the other one that we were looking at was nhs.uk. So I thought this was very performing very well. So you can see that in Andy's tests on even on a mobile device, an emulated mobile in London, it was 1.4 seconds, which is great. So I thought that the site, and you can see it's very lightweight. I found that when I ran the test the first time, I needed to go and accept the cookies, so to get to get more of the resources uploaded on the page. So let me actually go and drop. This is a desktop view. Oh, whoops. So there's a few more requests in here. What I wound up doing was I used a script to just throw my cookie that indicates the GDPR consent. It still was 1.4 seconds. You can see some more resources that were here. A couple of things I noticed, like the fonts are being preloaded, which I thought was great. So those are, the CSS and the fonts are the first resources that are loaded. The fonts are being loaded before the CSS even completes. But the subdomain here, assets.nhs.uk, means that we have to do a DNS lookup, a TCP connection, and a TLS handshake before we can request any of these critical resources. So the main CSS bundle is on the primary domain, but everything else is on assets.nhs.uk. Both of these go to the same IP address. So if I look at, this is 184.2.8.256.230, and then the other one is the same IP address. And typically, if both of these were using HTTP2, then the connections would coalesce. So you would actually just do the DNS lookup and not have to deal with the TCP and TLS time because of the connections would coalesce. But it looks like assets.nhs.uk is using HTTP 1.1. So that could be so what I would actually go one of two ways. I know, Matt, you've done some research on this for Govt UK, but I would either change assets.nhs.uk to be using the H2 protocol so that the connections can coalesce, and then just do a DNS prefetch within the response header. Or what I would do is serve the most critical resources, so your fonts and your JavaScript, from the primary domain.
So I'd also noticed that the images don't in browsers that can use WebP aren't being served WebP. Now there might be a good reason for this, but there could be a potential for savings, especially PNGs to lossless WebP is a pretty safe optimization as far as quality goes, because it's just lossless.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity, I think, for some assets down the page to benefit from native lazy loading, which would be great as a progressive enhancement, and you don't have to add any JavaScript to do that. And browsers that can use it will get it. Those that can't won't break. So there might be an opportunity there. I know it's that native lazy loading is working in Firefox Nightly right now, and it's pretty slick.
Isn't it? So I know that Firefox was building native lazy loading support in. Is it supported now?
I think it is, because when I've gone to my homepage, I tore out my lazy loading library on my own website, and I just started putting in native lazy loading, and it works. It works from what I can tell on my website. But for Chrome, it's a little bit more. It seems a little bit less straightforward. I don't know if Chrome's internals are like looking at network speed or quality before it decides it's going to lazy load something or not, because I can't always really get it to trip reliably in that browser. So I think there's some heuristics that are involved in that. Yes. Sorry. Long answer for question.
Cool. Anybody else have any thoughts on this site?
A question about the WebP. Is that something that the CDN can do? Can Akamai do that on the fly?
They have an image transform service, but Paul can speak to it a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, it all depends on whether or not whether or not the team running the NHS is using that particular service. But Akamai does have the capability of doing that. Another thing, just looking at an Akamai recommendation here is, so if you look, I intentionally made the first request over HTTP so that I would trigger a redirect to HTTPS. And when I look at the response headers for the initial initial redirect, I can see the 301, which is, it's good to do a 301 to HTTPS. I don't believe this is actually being generated by the CDN, so it's being generated at the origin, which means that there's an additional round trip. Now that round trip is going to be mostly equivalent to the from the edge to the origin. It's going to be mostly equivalent to the latency between that. However, I think that it's really fast here because this is running from London, probably to an origin that's I'm assuming is going to be in London, since it's the UK website, or at least in the UK. But but for users that are further away, this redirect time may actually be higher. So I would actually recommend generating that redirect at the CDN edge. This way, you don't have to deal with that round trip.
So another thing, kind of tagging on to the SSL, or rather the TLS time. I've noticed the strict transport security header has a low max age. It's like 5 minutes. There's always a reason for this. It's usually like a client, like when I've seen it, they're like rolling out HSTS preload very incrementally with slow max times. But if that could be expanded, return visitors will. And if you can get on the HSTS preload list, I'm not sure if that's something you're on yet. I haven't checked. That can really help to reduce some of that SSL like redirect time for HTTP to HTTPS.
Yeah, is that I think the HSTS preload, there's a website that you just go and
yeah, I'm gonna look it up real quick.
HSTS preload. There we go. I think you can go and throw that. Well, you can actually check to see if it's eligible. HS.uk. So the max age needs to be 1 year. preload directive needs to be in the HSTS, which you would do if you wanted to preload it. And then you also need to have the include subdomains directive. So with some changes to the HSTS, the header, you could do preload.
It's a great optimization because even those who have never gone to the website before will be able to benefit from this because it's just a list that's loaded into the browser.
Yeah, and the what's so like if you want to see what the behavior is like in the browser, so load the page up and then just force it to HTTP and what you'll notice is that the redirect that you get, which in this case was 2 milliseconds, was a 307, which is an internal redirect. So the browser is doing the redirect because it's cached the HSTS the HSTS response. So it knows to only serve this securely. This is often implemented for security reasons because it prevents interception. So it's easier to intercept an HTTP page than an HTTPS page. But it also has that performance benefit of completely eliminating that HTTP to HTTPS redirect. Another thing that we had noticed, and I pointed this out, Matt, earlier to you, is that the main CSS bundle here is not currently being gzip compressed. So you'll notice that in web page test, the bytes in and the uncompressed size is the same. If you look at the response, there's no content encoding. So the other resources on this page, if I look at JavaScript, you'll see content encoding gzip. So this is not currently using any. It's a critical resource, and it's not using gzip compression. So compressing that will make a pretty sizable impact here.
Sorry, I was on mute earlier. The only warning with the preload domains is all of your subdomains have to support HTTPS, or you can't do that. So just make sure before you turn that on that that's true.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely flag that as well. We had that on Govt.uk very recently. Microsoft enabled it by default and broke a lot of sites. And yeah, we had to scramble to disable that quickly. So,
oh wow.
Another point is about referring the cookie consent.javascript file because it's blocking the rendering of the page.
This one over here. Okay.
Yeah.
So is that needed to load early, or could that be even loaded conditionally based on the presence of the cookie?
I think it's possible to defer this file, and it's not crucial for the first rendering of the page, and that will prioritize the loading of the images and the main part of the page.
Okay.
It's a good point. I actually wanted to say the opposite, but yeah, it's debatable. Is because in the end, I think right now there are a lot of users who come for the first time to the NHS website. It's not like a newspaper where your cookie consent is always there. So you could also say that right now what you see is that the page is painted, and then I think at document ready you see that the cookie consent script kicks in, and then you have that huge layout shift. So I would potentially I even say that maybe for NHS right now the cookie consent should go faster, so you have that you don't have the layout shift. But yeah, that's two different potential solutions.
You can also test this to see if there's any breakage as well. Chrome has a really cool feature called local overrides, which let me go and just delete this one. Where you could you could assign a local directory to store some of your some of your resources. Now I can go to the NHS UK site, and I can save this for a local override. So now when I click refresh, it's going to load the page that's stored locally on my machine. So now what I can actually go and do is just defer the script, right? And if I save this and I refresh this, the script should be deferred, and we can see if you know, if there's any kind of impact to the loading and to the rendering of the page. May want to remove some of my storage for this just because I do want to trigger the cookie at this point. And I can go and refresh this and see, like, and it looks like when I've deferred it, it didn't actually pop up with the cookie consent. So deferring this piece of JavaScript might not be safe just because of the way it's implemented. It might require a little bit more analysis to determine whether or not you know how to properly defer it, or how to properly ensure that the overlay does come up for the cookie consent if it's deferred.
Kind of had a thought looking at the JavaScript list there. Is it possible? I noticed jQuery is like the really kind of the only vendor resource. Is it possible to sub in a lighter weight alternative like Zepto just to kind of cut a few things down, or are there some compatibility things there that just aren't going to make that possible?
That's a good question, Matt. Is that something that or Andy, you want to comment on that?
So I think the only thing we use jQuery for is Adobe Analytics, but we are in the process of rewriting that to stop using jQuery, so we could potentially get rid of it quite soon.
Better.
Which would be great, because all our custom JavaScript doesn't use any jQuery. It's just because we've got a dependency on a piece of feature from Adobe that requires jQuery, if I'm right. So if we can get that changed, then we can stop using jQuery.
Cool. By the way, one more note on the content overrides here. Make sure that you either delete your file when you're done, or you uncheck enable local overrides. Otherwise, you will wind up scratching your head at some point, wondering why the changes you've implemented in production aren't showing up in your browser. So you can either just delete the file or disable the local overrides. But this is a really fantastic way of being able to test your changes locally without having to deploy anything. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you don't shoot yourself in the foot by leaving it there.
Does that work with Lighthouse? So you can modify it, run a Lighthouse test, and it will notice the changes.
I think that if you run Lighthouse locally in the audits, I think I saw something from Addy a couple of months ago. I think that maybe 3 or 4 months ago, it was added so that it would apply the local overrides while the Lighthouse test was running.
If not, you might be able to use Fiddler for that too. I mean, you can do Fiddler and do breakpoints and intercept, or do local saves like that. And since it's a proxy, it'll be upstream. So as long as that's client-side stuff, you'd be okay.
Yeah, I've done that with Charles proxy as well. So you can use either Fiddler or Charles, but any proxy solution like that, you can definitely do like a content rewrite on the fly. The only challenge that you might experience with that is if you're using HSTS, then the browser might not load the resource, even if the certificate is like, even if you've trusted the root certificate on your machine. So for example like this, if we were to open up Fiddler or Charles, it might not actually work for this particular site, and that's specifically HTTPS.
I do it all the time. HTTPS, you'll be fine.
Well, not HTTPS, but because of HSTS, because of this.
Yeah, we run HSTS too.
Okay.
I mean, I'm doing both. That's just telling the client that you want to force it to use HTTPS. That's all the strict header does.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're doing decrypts and stuff in Fiddler, you'll be fine.
Okay, cool. I'll have to check that out. I haven't tried to do that in a while because it used to not work. Anything else on NHS.UK?
Images. We discussed the images.
Sure. It looks like this one here is 203 kilobyte image.
It looked like it was fairly well. Yeah, it looks like it's fairly well compressed. I'm not sure if there's a lot of bandwidth there to really compress it further. I did mention WebP, but I also didn't look to see what the SRC set for those images looked like either.
Yeah, so that image was looks like that's over here. So this particular image.
Oh,
one that,
I think that particular image is a bit further down the page, towards the bottom. So it is quite a small image compared to the actual size. Yeah, so that's the.
Yeah, that could definitely be resized.
yeah, I'm not seeing SRC sets images, so there's definitely.
Would you filter only by images in the waterfall diagram? I think there is something interesting by the order how they load. So for me, it looks like the hero image, the main hero image is always around the end.
Mm-hmm.
The last one is the hero image, and it always takes longer. For me, it looks like something dynamically happening on the server that returns it, because like file size, it looks like relatively the
So
same.
with that hero image, it changes each time you refresh the page. So it loads in an image 1 of 4, and that's currently done through JavaScript. So it's not an ideal solution because the JavaScript's obviously executing and then pulling the image after it's executed. So again, we could potentially just change that single image. But yeah, every time you refresh the page, in theory, that header image changes to 1 of 4 images.
I wonder if it makes sense to, like, if you want to prioritize the image loading, could you just have the image referenced with you know, just kind of like a hidden, like, even if it's just hidden in like a 1 pixel image source at the top of the body. This way the parser catches it really quick and initiates the request.
I don't know. One of the things I would do, Paul, is do you want to switch to mobile emulation? Because my guess is that as NHS, as this consumer website, and most consumer websites in the UK are heavily dominated by mobile traffic, if you look, some of those images look quite large to be used in a mobile context.
Yeah, that's quite large for mobile. So it's still 204 kilobytes. So the this image is not being it's even being displayed.
It's not responsive.
It's not responsive. No, it's still 204 kilobytes even at even when it's being rendered for mobile. It's the same image. I wonder if did the Lighthouse results catch that too? The fourth recommendation here was properly sized images. So for this one, it actually said that, and I think that Lighthouse does like a JPEG compression level 85 as its baseline, and it was able to reduce this down to like 100 down to like, what is it, 7 kilobytes. Oh, another thing that it caught here is that the assets are not being served with an efficient cache policy. So there's no max age. Like there's no max age for any of these resources. Noticed that before. You want to take a look at that real quick. So yeah, there's e tags, but there's no and there's last modified headers, but there's no cache control header. The default behavior for this is the HTTP spec allows for heuristic caching. So this is considered to be a cacheable request in the browser, but the browser is allowed to decide how long to cache it for. I wrote a blog post on this a while back. There's a really great tool that Mark Nottingham wrote a while ago called Redbot that allows you to just kind of throw something in here and get this human readable description of the cache headers. So this shows you that this resource is 176 days old, and the response allows caches to assign its own freshness lifetime. I definitely recommend adding some caching headers to that. For this, the last time I looked at this, it was back in 2018. So I don't think anything's changed since then. But Chrome cached it for 10% of the time since last modified, which would still be quite a long time. Firefox cached it for 10% of the time since last modified, but limited it to 7 days. And Safari does the same. Legacy IE just considered it to be indefinitely cacheable, so there's no expiration.
I would do exactly what you're saying. We just set expirations to be like 30 days or a year because it looks like that has probably cache busting anyways. I mean, that's a pretty specific name with the EM 860176. I mean, we set it because we don't want browsers making those decisions, right? Let's force a cache amount and use cache busting if you have to.
Yeah, it looks like the JavaScript resources, or actually most of the other resources, definitely have that cache busting, or like a kind of a build ID in there. So it should be cache busted on build.
I'm going to be the heretic. I don't care. It's like, so I'm going to be controversial here for a minute. So the contents of our browser cache and our visitors' browser caches live for such a short length of time. You know, if we look at the old Yahoo study or the Facebook study where Facebook put something in a browser cache and then went back and went back on a frequent basis, and often the resource wasn't there. If Facebook can't keep stuff in a browser's cache, what can the rest of us do? So I don't worry too much about heuristic caching. If the browser's doing heuristic caching, I suspect that's good enough because I only expect caching to last for a single session to a website, and next time somebody comes back, it will be evicted the cache by other content. So that's my slightly controversial take on it.
I take the opposite. I mean, add it. It's very small in the response. And if your customer happens to have it cached, yay them, and they have a better experience. I mean, I can't control if it's there or not. But if it is, why not give them the benefit of pulling it out of their local cache?
I think it depends on the type of application. So for something like Facebook, where it's a dynamic feed, and when you go back, it will very well not be the same thing. That what Andy is saying can make sense, but I think for something like NHS that is a little bit more static and predictable, and may have a fair amount of return visitors, I would agree. Page on that would be good.
So Peter Brent Miller had mentioned something here about cache headers instructing CDN edge caches. So CDNs can be configured to honor cache control headers, but CDNs can also override that and set their own cache TTLs. So it depends on it depends on the individual site.
Is that by setting public versus private, if I recall?
So public indicates to a downstream proxy that it is allowed to cache, but most CDNs can override that as well. And even if it's private, they'll still set their own TTL based on the configuration because they're essentially a reverse proxy that that's part of that web infrastructure.
Yeah, they're an extension of the origins, effectively, aren't they? Because they're under the origins control.
Anybody else have anything on NHS?
I'm thinking about prefetching the coronavirus page from the homepage.
That's a good one. Is that page cached? Let me double check. If that page is cacheable both in the browser as well as on the CDN, then I definitely think that would make a big impact because you won't have the kind of the origin hit. And yeah, it looks like this is cached in the browser for 5 seconds, but I can't comment on whether or not it's cacheable at the CDN, but I imagine that if it's cacheable in the browser, it's cacheable on the CDN. So if that is being cached and there isn't a risk of excess load on the origin, then doing the prefetch from the homepage would actually be a really good idea. Anybody else have anything on NHS.pk? Cool. I saw another one in the chat. I'm just trying to scroll up to see what I think it was 111.nhs.uk.
Hi, yeah, it's Craig Bonds. Sorry, I was very late to the call, so I'm not sure if you'd covered this already.
No, we looked at we spent a bunch of time on www.nhs.uk, but we haven't looked at 111 yet.
Took a quick look at this one while the chat was going on. There's definitely a lot of improvements here. It's HTTP 1 and a lot of other things like easy wins, I think.
Cool. It's definitely very lightweight. For me, it loaded in half a second, which is pretty awesome.
I'm just wondering, in terms of maybe Adam will know this. In terms of infrastructure, is this the same infrastructure as the main www website, and we can sort of take over some learnings from the main website to the 111 website, or are they completely separate entities?
That's a good question.
It's a completely separate Azure subscriptions, complete different setup.
Right. Okay.
We do work closely together, or we do more closely in the last couple of weeks at least.
It looks like you're not using persistent connections. So it's going to open up a connection for every single resource on the which is going to which means that you wind up having to do that HTTP TLS and TCP connection for every single resource. So enabling not only would I enable H2, but I would also make sure that you do persistent connections, because this is wasteful. All that's 40 milliseconds on that one. And if we go down the list here, you got another 40 milliseconds on this one here. So every single request is incurring latency because you have to establish that connection.
Okay. So none of the developers of the website are on the call because they're all busy fighting fires at the moment and coding new releases every 10 minutes. So is this being recorded? I can see a record button. Is that something that's going to be available?
Yep, this is being recorded, and I'll share it on YouTube later.
Brilliant. Okay, you can pull this apart then, and I'll speak to the guys when we get a chance to look at the recording.
Okay. Another thing I noticed here is that you're loading some resources. Your web fonts. You're loading it from assets.nhs.uk. So that's going to have that same, like if we run a web page test measurement, you'll see that this time is actually going to be offset by the TCP, TLS, and DNS for loading the subdomains. So if you I would actually recommend hosting the fonts on the primary domain and serving them off of the primary domain.
Okay.
Maybe adding font display for these two fonts also.
Sorry?
Adding font display for these two fonts.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So let's go see where the fonts are. It looks like the fonts are being preloaded, which is nice. But let's see where go to the once in a while this happens where drawer gets let's see, toggle drawer. Why that happens? I knew why that happened, but could search for I guess it's probably in the CSS somewhere where the font is being loaded.
I sent the link in the chat.
Okay, cool. So it is this one. So yeah, these are not being adding font display swap here would create a flash of unstyled text instead of the flash of invisible text. So yeah, that would definitely help out here as well. It might be erased because it's you're preloading the font and you're also saying don't display the native font, but it's still if the font takes long to download, then at least the system font will be displayed first.
Okay.
Cool. Now this site's like really fast, so I'm I'm kind of.
You should see the Azure bill at the moment. We need to rein it back in.
Sorry.
So we had an outage, and ever since then, it's been cranked right up to maximum. So we do need to rein it back in. So everyone's a bit nervous since the outage.
Is the kind of lightweight experience that I'm seeing here, is this because of the emergency situation, or is this just kind of your normal guidelines for how you provide this type of interface? Because I know that I know I've seen this on news sites where, especially if there's natural disasters, there's like a low bandwidth version that suddenly gets switched to. And I remember seeing that during 9/11, which that was 20 years ago, but or 19 years ago, but I'm just curious, is this something that was just an intentional design, or is this?
Yes, it's intentional. Yeah.
Let's see if that one's and again, this loaded from London in 673 milliseconds. So you can see there's the asset subdomain that where it took that latency was incurred for loading the font because of the separate subdomain. But yeah, there's so few requests here. This is pretty amazing to see how lightweight of an experience you've made this.
Some of the same tool chain optimization opportunities for this website as well. But yeah, I agree. This is a super lightweight website compared to any median sort of like website or experience. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The content's not cacheable, so it's dynamic as people go through the journey and answer the questions about their conditions and their symptoms. So something you should have a play with sometime.
My only question on your assets comment is, if you show that screen again, why wouldn't you push more of those resources to run from your assets?
Oh, here we go.
If that's a CDN, I mean, why are the JavaScript, CSS, and all that stuff being served from primary? I'd go the other way. I'd shove all those to assets and have those be on a CDN. Especially if you're on H2 and you get one assets connection and you keep alive to work.
So it does look like let me go and share this. So it does look like the 1.111.nhs.co.nhs.uk is CNAME to Akamai, so it is using CDN.
Okay.
Yeah, and web page test would have flagged that as well, because it's got that check from kind of the old page speed optimizations. Yeah, very, very nicely done on the third parties here, because there are none. The request map's got to look really, really nice with just 2 dots there.
Do my eyes deceive me?
Yeah. It's I don't think I've seen a high traffic website that is under 150 kilobytes in probably most of my career, which is
almost as if they're prioritizing the user experience.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, nicely done, NHS team. Anybody else have? Oh, it looks like Amen had recommended NHS location. That one.
It's case sensitive.
Does it look? Oh, okay. Maybe WebEx just capitalize that. Oh no, it's not.
Yeah. It was my.
It should come from the first page. I think it's.
Okay, so
you can't direct access to it.
That's interesting. So if you click start, you go to the location page. Then I can enter. I don't know any postcodes, so someone in the UK, can you give me a postcode?
I'll give you mine.
Sorry.
There you go.
Golf Lima 10.
Alrighty.
Is that page a client-side router, or why is /location not responding?
Sorry.
Is the so /location, is that actually JavaScript routed from the entry point page? Or?
Good point. Don't know. Let's check. So let's go back to DK page, and I've checked off preserve logs so that we'll be able to so that it doesn't erase everything here. And if I click start, we can see actually it doesn't show where the well, it's saying initiated by others. So I'm wondering if it's interesting. Is that I guess it requires the referrer to be there. I wonder if it's checking to see if the referrer is present on the either the referrer or the cookie. Maybe
That is a session ID.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to go and disable cache as well. Uncheck the disable cache. So let's refresh this. Start off from the home page again, and also clear all of our storage. Starting as a new user.
So the majority of the traffic would be in that link in the yellow bar at the top. So that's people that are checking for coronavirus symptoms.
Okay. If I click on that, it looks like most of the resources are sitting in the browser cache. So you're really just loading the HTML, which is great. There's very few new resources that are being loaded, which is really great. Enter the postcode in, and that triggered a request to find. 30 milliseconds. Again, everything is loaded from cache. So good job on the caching here. Yeah, it's all thermometer, feel not touch, yes. Next question. Yeah, everything's loaded from cache. This is great. And the responses are very fast as well. Again, I think the only thing that I would change there is this the connection close. I would use persistent connections, and then I would for the first part the fonts I would serve off the same domain. But yeah, it's fine. I think that's great.
And that should be simply like an infrastructure change, shouldn't it? Almost flicking a switch on the back end, will it?
Should be.
In this case, it's the CDN.
Yeah. Say it again.
In this case, the keep alive comes from the CDN, not from the original.
Yeah, you should be able to configure the keep alive as well as H2 within the CDN.
Right.
So normally by default, the keep alive is 500 seconds from the CDN. So yeah, it should have been turned off explicitly.
This is where I shouldn't have used my actual postcode. Someone will be outside now. It's all right, the wife will get.
Thankfully, it didn't ask for your address.
Yeah.
If you have some analytics here that's saying how many people need an ambulance, then I may have screwed something up.
That's really good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. This is great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Just this kind of show of force from the web performance community, just to kind of brainstorm and help out people that are helping us. So thank you all for taking the time and joining us today. Definitely would like to continue this. If there's anything that anybody else wants to look at, feel free to throw something into that Google form. I'll also start another Twitter thread about next session as well. And hopefully we have some more sites to look at as well. This is really great. So thank you all for joining and helping out.
Excellent. No, it's really, really handy.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording and